The grassy field was slick from the light showers earlier in the day, and it provided for a great dynamic battleground for the game of football. The unexpected elements of a slippery ground took the feet out from most of the athletes who relied on shifty movements, jousts, and feints, as cleats were not a part of middle school flag football. The wet environment also made the small pockets of dirt into muddy piles that stand closed like a badge of honor for any athlete that was rugged enough to kiss turf. Any of the kids that were pinned with a sludge of goop on their arm or lower legs would refrain from wiping it off and instead bore it into view like a warrior would a battle scar. The official competition had started, and the high school football captains were squaring off their middle school teams against one another while casting half sarcastic jests at their brethren who wore the same colored jersey. The, the matchup for us was imbalanced to the greatest degree, and victory had already been declared upon second down. The other team was so demoralized by the lack of athleticism in their ranks and the distance in which their coach had placed himself from them that they dragged on through the game without any real intent to succeed. Sean's concern over the game was clearly not a matter, as his mind was preoccupied with something else, and he wasn't fearful at disclosing it to me. As he called me right over and came out and said it. "Broski, is Kristen your sister?" Sean asked, pulling me off to the sideline as our team was on the road to triumph. "Yeah," I said, without much interest. I knew where it was going. I was thrilled to see Dylan running into the open field with great enthusiasm. He hardly ever needed my help anymore. He leapt high into the air to catch a long pass and slid onto the ground after trying to evade an opponent on the wet-soaked earth. He still made it to the end zone, and I threw my hands into the air to indicate my excitement for his success, as he looked my way to see if I had witnessed his glory. Sean really didn't care for Dylan's contribution, as we were easily in the lead, and he wanted my full attention. After the excitement of the event had died down, I turned back to Sean, forgetting what he had asked. "Did Kristen say anything about me the other day?" Sean asked, his mind oblivious to the game going on ahead of us. "No," I had said, though she did say one thing. She had asked me on the ride home the other day, just after seeing Sean, if his name happened to be just that, and well, I had said yes. Didn't seem relevant at the time to mention that, though. "Man," Sean said in disappointment, "you gotta put a good word in for me, bro." I guess he expected me to know what that meant. Had I relied simply on my 6th grade instincts, I would have been lost in his vague request. Of course, I had my way around things, and I was completely capable of seeing what he had intended to say. Sean wanted in on my sister, like every other guy, but after a few pondering seconds, I thought perhaps it wouldn't be that bad. He was nice to me, anyways, and, well, he was my coach. Perhaps Kristen could use a guy like that. I started to like the sound of it. "All right," I said with a great smile, as Sean threw a fist into my shoulder. I really didn't mind getting the two together. "Right, bro, right on. Here, I got something." Sean fished through his pockets. "These are tickets to my game. You gotta give them to her. Tell her to go. You go with her, too. Don't let her bring another guy or anything like that. She is single, right?" I just shrugged, then grabbed the tickets, cramming them into my pockets without much care. "All right, right on," Sean said, while standing back up, taking my confused gesture as a positive remark. He shouted words of encouragement over his players before nudging me back into the field. Sean was waiting eagerly for the game to conclude in anticipation of seeing Kristen again. It was too bad for him. It was Dylan's mother's turn to drive us home. He just pointed to me as we left, reminding me to give Kristen the tickets he had given me and to put in his good word. When we were in the car together, I had shown Dylan the tickets that Sean had given me. When he had asked why he had given them to me, I told him they were for Kristen. That Sean was trying to get her to go to his football game, probably so he could impress her. To my surprise, Dylan rose up in jealousy. He nearly put voice to the emotion he was feeling in the car, until he remembered his mother was in the front driver's seat, and any mention of him being possibly interested in a girl would extort a terrible, embarrassing intervention from his mother, who was too eager to get him a girlfriend. I leaned into him. "Really?" I said with a smirk, even though he didn't say anything out loud. "My sister is nearly twice your age." I tried to keep it quiet, under the radar of his mother. "I didn't say anything. Why do you always do that?" Dylan asked. "Do what?" I had questioned back. "Read my mind. It is annoying. You always know what I'm thinking or going to say." "Oh," I had said. "I don't know, I just guess." "What number am I thinking of?" 20 billion, I answered. "Holy crap," Dylan exclaimed. "Dylan!" Dylan's mother had yelled out, and I had never heard her raise her voice. "What did I just hear you say?" Dylan refused to break the look of shock across his face. "How did you do that?" he asked, ignoring the distress of his mother. I sat back in the seat. "I just can. I don't know why, but you can't tell anyone. Promise?" I put out my pinky finger before Dylan wrapped his own around mine. "Promise," Dylan had said, before turning to face the front of the car, and dropped his voice in a whisper. "Hey, what is my mom thinking?" The city streets were crowded with people. Men, women, and children walked across the vast openness of the roads, dressed from elegantly trimmed and iron-pressed dress suits to casual clothes that many would not wear in such open public areas, as they would have found the coffee-stained sweatpants to be a blow to their fastidious dignity. Not one person would unexpectedly bump into another, or brush shoulders while they flowed freely, and without direction through a wide city street that appeared to have no end. No vehicles drove on this road, nor was there the busy chatter of people or ringing cell phones that would accompany a city-like landscape such as this. There was just the cacophony of feet across the smoothly paved roadway that lacked any painted lines or symbols that would indicate the permitted form of passage, or the direction of traffic. It was organized chaos. A giant tower far down the road could be seen over the heads of the dense crowd, reflecting the blue sheen of the sky in its massive windows. Its size was capable of housing thousands, even though no life could be seen within it. It was an industrial skyscraper, but even under the light of the sun it appeared Gothic, its shadows stretched out far all over the lands beyond it. I passed through the people, my every step and every turn executed entirely of my own will. The people around me all walked in one strict, confined line of their own, while they shared the same pace in their steps, and though their paths would intersect, their timing was perfect, so that no collisions would ever occur. Everyone was on a mindless journey in their own direction, preset and predetermined by something other than themselves. They were off to no real destination, just wherever the road would bring them, and from what I could see, that road led to nowhere. Not one of them walked in the direction of the tower. I was all alone. It was the one thing that caught the eye in this barren cityscape. It was a pillar that pierced the sky, its external appearance blending in with the mundane concrete structures, acting as though it was just another building among the glorious elevation of a corporate family. It could not deceive me, for its infrastructure was not made by the tools of man, or the metals of this earth. It was something else. I had to find out. But I knew distance was at a loss in a place like this. Despite it appearing possible to reach, I knew had I placed the effort to get there, it would either vanish or I would be returned long before I had even gotten close. That was the essence of these worlds, a fruitless, futile attempt to breach the normality instilled in its setting. I stepped in someone's path. The man bumped into me, stepping back and looking down into my eye, shaking his head in confusion. I felt the rage that grew across his face as he became offended that somebody such as I would cross paths with him. He remarked how I was so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, a child who hardly understood the mere importance of his existence, of his determination and role in this world, and now I was to step in his way? How dare I make such a foolish mistake? That was when he realized he had no real meaning to this world, that he was nothing that he once believed. He was a ghost. "Who are you?" he asked. He was dressed in a striped, expensive jacket with a red tie at its center. I did not answer, and a passing lady who had caught word of the man stopped in her tracks and joined him at his side. They both looked down at me, with investigative detail. "My lord," she exclaimed. "My savior!" she had said, falling to her knees. She was a black woman, with small beads weaved into her dreaded hair, and her costume was striped like that of a tiger, taken on an origin that I was not familiar with. "My God, why do you come to me and bless me with your image?" she asked, bowing to the ground. The man to her side watched in wonder as to what she was doing. "I am not your God," I had told the lady, having been faced with the same occurrence many times before. Her head had lifted, her mouth wide open, and she froze in posture. "Why do you say this?" she asked, shedding tears of confusion, as her mind bent against what it had always believed in. "I always believed you were there." The man stopped staring at the woman and realigned his eyes with me. He saw something of great importance, and eagerly stepped forward. "Tell me, Dirkshire, sell or buy? What should I do?" asked the man, waving his suitcase around in distress. "You know the answer. I have read all about you. Tell me, what is it Wall Street is planning?" I left them, and walked back into the crowd of people. Every individual whose path I had stepped through had come to an alarming stop. They would stare at their hands, their feet, or the objects they were carrying. They became aware of themselves, and soon after cast their eyes on me in weary glances, as though I appeared that much different from the rest. Most had deemed me to be some faithful deity of their religion, while others had seen me as fallen family members or a long-lost friend. Those who were more confined to the job world saw me as a business strategist or a genius who could explain to them the mathematical calculation they needed in their engineering world. Some saw me as a prophet, set on delivering them the future, while others cowered at my sight, assuming I was a vengeful angel, set on redemption. They all saw different things, but what they shared in common was the intent to follow me. I was none of these things. None of the things they had thought. I was Derek Kaon, a boy who had found himself all too often confined to this strange place. Continuing to push my way towards the tower, I came upon another individual. He did not walk the rigid lines as the others, and he saw me long before I had intersected his path. He was the warrior I had seen before. Though the man lacked the glimmering armor, the giant polearm, and the bravado of casting back demonic hellhounds, he was still the very same man, and the familiar glint in his eye had told me that he shared the same recognition as I. He ran towards me, throwing the other mindless people out of his way as though they were mere objects. Their fallen forms climbed their way off the ground, stepped back into their path, and continued walking without any further regard for his actions. "You!" he shouted, pushing through the crowd as they grew thick. His voice had stopped the people in their track, and they turned to face him in unison, with blank, emotionless stares. The eyes of the crowd grew narrow, squinting as though in recognition of something out of place. They scolded him, stared hard into him, as though he was somebody who simply didn't know his place. He stepped out of the lines of conformity, and they hated him for that. "I know you! I had seen you before!" the warrior shouted, as the mindless drones began to gather, making a circle with me at their center. The men and women of the streets clung onto the passing warrior, hanging onto his form as he dragged them through the streets, as though they wanted to prevent him from going anywhere. "You're that boy! I remember you!" he shouted, as the crowd threw themselves at him, forcing him away with me, without concern for their own well-being. They all pulled and pried at him with all their strengths, but the warrior possessed a vigor uncommon to most people. "Tell them to stop. I must speak with you. Why is it that they protect you? What drives them to do this?" the man struggled, throwing the bodies off of him with extraordinary strength. "You can't continue this. All of this. This is not some imaginary place." He flung out his arms, indicating the world around him. "This is a person. This world is the heart of their mind, and everything you do here will change them, for good or for worse." His voice became muffled, as the bodies piled on him, suffocating him underneath their bountiful bodies. "I have seen you!" I could barely make out his words through the corpses. "You consulted with that demon. You took it all away, but what promises were made?" His hand was the last thing I could see, before another body smothered it out of sight. "You know not what you do." A giant shadow casted over the distant tower, and the looming wings of a great beast was closing in. A serpent of terrifying scale, a face incarnate of the fear of all men feel, and an aura of the outrage that humanity was all too prone to use, cast over the city streets like a toxic cloud of nuclear fallout. The end of days was at hand. The crowd broke apart, fleeing in every direction, leaving the warrior crippled on the ground. He tried to speak. His body was battered, and despite his spirit's attempt to return him from this world, he fought to stay. He needed to speak to me. "Please, stop it." The beast was descending on wings of shallow despair, and landed its massive taloned feet around the warrior. Great shadows were cast out, swallowing the fleeing people who had since forgotten their narrow and tedious path. The shroud that engulfed the city, the skies, had blocked out the sun, and the air quickly rose to a staggering temperature. I had to go. Reeling back through the levels of consciousness, I faded from that far and distant land, leaving behind the turmoil it had unintentionally unfurled. I reached back to my body, feeling its silver cord guiding me through the vast space of imaginary design. Worlds far beyond that of our waking mind had collided into shapes and figures that defied common logic, resisted gravity, and broke the laws of spatial dimensions. Numerous creations flowed freely in a space that could only be called infinity. My world, the familiar life on Earth, slowly drew into view, and I could feel the presence of my body. The silver cord that bound my waking form to the astral planar continued to bring me home, and I soon saw myself lying asleep in my bed, lifeless and abandoned. My sister was in my room, trying to wake me, her voice and actions increasing the speed in which the silver cord drew me back, until she grabbed a hold of my arm, and the cord was severed. Kristen continued to tug onto my arm, though I couldn't feel it. I witnessed it through a hazy depiction of the room. I could not find my way back. My body was not there. With the connection of my sister's hand and the ring on her finger to the bare flesh of my arm, the life force in my body had been muted, and I weaved my essence into distorted directions trying to find the limbs I once had. I needed her to let go of my body. "Derek, this is getting out of hand. You need to wake up," Kristen's voice sounded, agitated on top of the screeching vibrations of the world around me. She shook my sleeping body. I quickly begun to understand the difficulty I had in waking up. I would wake up on my own without a problem, rarely having that nauseating sense of confusion when I returned. But when it came to relying on Kristen as an alarm clock, the connection to my body would be severed. Returning was difficult, and now that she refused to let go of my arm, I was stuck in limbo. She waved my hand around above my body as though I was a puppet in an attempt to restore my wakefulness, and I could do nothing about it. I had no choice but to wait until she decided to release me. "That's it. I'm done. You're going in the shower." Kristen's threat sounded distant from wherever I was, but I knew her words with great clarity, as she had been telling me that one day she'll finally do it. If I wasn't going to wake up on time, she would throw me under cold water, which I frankly didn't think would do a thing in the state that I was in, for as long as her fingers held on to me. Her hand still gripping my arm as she dragged me off the side of the bed and slid her other arm under me to carry me out of the room. I began shouting, throwing words in every direction, which rippled through the distorted air with exaggerated effect, but my body only received a fraction of the force. My mouth was mumbling, the words in a groggy string of indecipherable mess, and Kristen ignored my attempt to speak. As Kristen stepped across the old playroom that parted her bedroom from mine, she carried my body off to the bathroom in her attempt at resolving the issue of my delayed awakenings. I could feel the slight movement of my body, and the numbing pressure on parts of me where Kristen held on to. I was not entirely lost, but my body could not make a full connection. My astral form continued to follow, pulled lightly in the direction of my body, as though it knew where its home was, and I was led into the bathroom. I reached around myself as though I had arms grabbing onto every nearby object I could. My form stretched wide, and the sensations of extending my astral arms outward had split into dozens of additional limbs. I could feel thousands of nimble fingers caressing across the untold numerous items throughout the bathroom, and they responded back to me with textures, weight, surface tensions, and a multitude of other physical attributes from the object in their grasp. They adhered to my every thought, and with that in mind, I had clenched them shut and threw my hands into the air. Kristen was in the bathroom with my limp body in her arms. She looked at the inside of the bathtub with a face that said it was long since tired of having to deal with the exhaustive struggle of waking me up. She lowered me in the tub, sliding one arm out from under me while she went to twist the rotary knob to the shower's water control. To reach it, she removed her other hand, the one bearing the ring. When Kristen's hand finally parted with my body, my form had returned. I blasted into my body with the speed of blinding light, but not before my astral form had fired off its struggling energies, like bottled-up pressure that was released once the ring had parted with my flesh. I screamed, knowing Kristen was moments from hitting me with cold water, and she jumped back at the same time as every shampoo, conditioner, bottle, bar of soap, toothbrush, bathroom cleaning spray, and endless more had flown into the air, crashing up against the roof of the bathroom. Her scream had joined mine as her hands flew to the top of her head to protect herself from the flying objects that landed caressingly across the floor. She was still screaming a good 15 seconds after I had ran out of breath, and when she was done, she refused to lower her hands from above her head. "Derek!" she shouted, as though I was the cause of what happened. Sure, it was true, but I mean, she didn't know that. Her eyes were wide, as though she stared up upon a ghost. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer her. I tried to act nonchalant about the whole thing. After all, I did just officially wake up. After she looked around the room, repeating her last words again and again, I sat there in the tub, trying to think of an excuse. "An earthquake?" I asked, and she looked back at me. "Maybe?" she said, as I extended my arms out to her for help out of the tub. "Well, at least that got you to wake up." Kristen helped lift me out, while bewilderment was still on her face. She looked around the bathroom floor at all the objects that had fallen off the shelves and out of the glass cupboard. Did we really have an earthquake? She asked, looking at me as though I had the answer. I shrugged, and Kristen ran out of the bathroom and I followed in hot pursuit. She had stopped short in her bedroom doorway, realizing everything was in its place and how the alleged shaking of the earth seemed to be confined only to the bathroom. I ran off to my room and put on the clothes I had worn yesterday, and desperately hoped that Kristen would just let the bathroom occurrence pass over her. I found my sister again a few minutes later, downstairs sitting on one of the kitchen stools with the palms of her hands pressed into the temples of her head. I think I am losing it, she said out loud. I think so too. Shut up, Derek. Did you not see what happened back there? You are going to get me wet, I shouted, showing anger over her intentions to soak me in freezing water. I think our bathroom just blew up, she claimed, while looking as though a curious thought had just surfaced. Use the downstairs bathroom from now on. I reached into my pockets and found the tickets still in there from the other day. I slapped them on the counter in front of her to get her mind somewhere else. Sean wanted you to have those, I said. Sean? Sean who? Kristen paused, as she saw the tickets. Wanted me to have them? I nodded my head as I climbed onto one of the high stools. Did he say anything about me? She asked, and I wanted to laugh, as it was the same thing Sean had asked me. I don't know, I said, feeling awkward talking about it. Do you think he likes me? I lurched my head back with a crooked face. You? Who would like you? I acted disgusted at the thought. Kristen crumpled the tickets and threw them at me, before realizing she actually wanted the tickets, and quickly retrieved their now ball-like form. The thought was dancing on the top of my head. I knew I never liked any of Kristen's boyfriends, but Sean, well, he wasn't half bad. He was a football player. It wasn't like he was going to be heavily drugging himself and chasing after my sister during all ends of the day. He at least had some kind of life. I knew it wasn't going to be Sean. If it wasn't going to be Sean, it was going to be some other guy. And with that in mind, I figured I'd let the two fall into one another. But the social cliques and differences between Sean and my sister was a big drawing line. In fact, I was surprised by the idea that Kristen actually wanted to attend the football game, as she normally was busy criticizing the stupidity of such violent sports. It was time for me to go to school.